So the last video, we got our pretty basic table view cell all set up. Now it's time to actually build this table view, populate it with our favorites, and get this whole thing up and running. So in our favorites list VC, I've got a little bit of a mess because we were just testing things. Let's start cleaning this up here. So out of this view did load, let's create a function called get favorites. And again, for now, we're going to come back and revisit that function here in a little bit, but let's get this persistent manager stuff out of here because we'll be doing that. And we're going to also be configuring our view controller. So just like we've had in our other ones, configure view controller. And in here, this is where we're not going to have our background color be system blue anymore. We want this to be system background. There we go. Another thing we want to do is title is going to equal favorites. We'll line those up in a second. So we want the title of the navigation bar to say favorites, right? As you see in the design that I'll pull up here. So we have that. And now we want to do large titles, just like we have here on our follower list VC. We're preferring the large titles. We can copy and paste this. And I'm doing a lot of copying and pasting on purpose, just to show you how you can kind of, when you do everything programmatically, you have a lot of reusable code. So we can do that. Of course, if you chose to type that out again, that's fine. I like to do a lot of copying and pasting when it comes to that. So here in configure view controller, and we're just kind of setting up, we're not obviously touching the table view stuff quite yet. I just wanted to clean this up, get this stuff separated before we began, kind of clean up the workspace before we start. So like I said, view.background color, system background, same thing we've been doing. We're setting the title to favorites, and then we're making sure we're using the large titles for this navigation controller, right? Because each navigation controller is different. If you remember all the way back to like our beginning lessons, our favorites list VC already has this navigation bar, prefers large titles, but that's a separate navigation controller, right? Remember we had two navigation controllers in both of our tabs. Well, now in the favorites list VC, we're in the other tab, so we're in a whole different navigation controller. So that's why we have to set that here. So with that kind of maintenance out of the way, let's start talking about our table view. So the first thing we're going to need is a table view. So let table view equal UITableView, initialize that. And then remember, like I said, for every table view, collection view, we need an array of objects. So let's do var followers, not followers, var favorites equals, and this is a, whoops, it's of type array of followers. And that is going to equal the empty array here. So we'll tab those over. So we have our table view and our favorites, which is empty. So what's going to happen is in get favorites here, we're going to populate our favorites array. There's a lot more we have to do in this function. We'll come back to in a second, but essentially we're going to do favorites, self.favorites equals favorites, the favorites that we passed in here. Again, we're going to come back to that, but that is essentially what's happening here. Just to give you a little sneak peek, when we successfully retrieve our favorites from user defaults, we're going to set that favorites array that we just created up here equal to that array of favorites we got. So now let's create a function called configure table view, because there's some setup we have to do with the table view. So func configure table view. And the first thing, hopefully you're familiar with this, is with the table view, we have to set up the delegates for the data source and delegate. So table view.delegate equals self, and table view.data source equals self. So now, just like we did with other protocol conformances, as you can see, it'll say cannot assign value of type this because we don't conform to the delegate here. So let's do our extension on the favorites list VC, and we're going to conform to UI table view data source and UI table view delegate. Now, one thing somebody has brought up in a past video is it's very common for people to want to have the data source outside of the view controller. You know, it breaks MVC back to like, does the view controller need to know about this? And the answer is no. However, my take on that, just to put it on video, is if the data source is super straightforward, very simple, like this one is going to be, as you're about to see, I prefer to keep it in the view controller with all the table view stuff. And to me, that just makes the code base easier to follow, easier to reason about. Now, of course, these data sources can get pretty complex, right? Like if your table view or collection view has 5 sections, they're coming from different areas, these can get very, very complex. And of course, in that situation, it is absolutely wise to move your data source outside of your view controller. However, again, my preference, because again, it's a constant balance of, you don't follow MVC like at all costs, because sometimes you can be making very, very tiny abstractions that introduce unnecessary complexity, in my opinion. Whereas keeping it straightforward and simple is better. Again, my subjective opinion, but I want to let people know that's why I'm keeping this data source in the view controller. Again, if this data source was really, really complex, I would 100% be moving it out of the view controller. Now, all that being said, let's give us our data source protocol stubs. So we're going to return favorites.count, because this is our number of rows in section. So the number of rows that our table view is going to have is however many favorites we have in our array. And then now we need to set up our self row and index path. So we need to create our cell. So let cell equal tableview.dequeue reusable cell with identifier. And remember, the string is going to be, remember we did this in the favorite cell that we copied and pasted from our follower cell, where we're creating this reuse ID of favorite cell. So let's go back to our favorites list VC, and that is going to be favorite cell.reuse ID. Again, same thing we did with our collection view. We need to cast this as a favorites cell. So that way it knows, hey, this is a favorite cell, and we can use our cell.setFavorite, this function here that we created in our favorite cell, right? If we didn't cast it as a favorite cell, it wouldn't know that it had this function. So that's why we have to do that. So back to follower list VC. Now we need to get our favorites list VC. I've been mixing that up a lot. So let favorite equal favorites, and this is going to be indexPath.row. indexPath.row. So again, I explained this in the collection view, but essentially this is our array of favorites. And you know how you can access the items in an array by doing, again, I'll do this example again, repetition. I can do favorites, at index path 2, at index 3, index 4. Well, indexPath.row basically just says, this is an int. IndexPath.row returns an int, and that's the index that we're grabbing based on where it's at in the table view row. So now that I have my cell in the favorite, I can do cell.setFavorite, and we're going to pass in our favorite that we created on line 60. So now, remember, self row at index path gets called every time a cell comes on the screen. Like if you're scrolling through real fast, every time the cell shows up, self row at index path is getting called. So cell.set is going to get called every time it shows up. And then back to the favorite cell, that's again where we're, setting the username and setting the avatar image. We're downloading the view. So now we need to return cell. So like I said, this is our entire data source right here. And this is just so simple and straightforward. I just think abstracting it away just leads to more confusion. Like I'd rather have it right here in the view controller. Again, if this got super complex with multiple sections, absolutely get rid of it. So now that we've set up our data source, we got some delegate methods we're going to implement in a little bit, but let's go back up to our configure table view, because this is what we were doing before we got distracted with our delegate and data source. I did forget to do one major thing. Remember I said you're going to forget to do this many times if you're doing things programmatically. I forgot to do view.add subview. We have to add the table view to the subview. Forgot to do that. And then we have to basically tell the table view like how big to be, right? So table view.frame is going to equal view.bounds. So basically this says fill up the whole view. That's what we want for the table view. And then the last thing we're going to do is, we'll put it up here, I guess, since this is more UI layout type stuff. Table view.row height is going to equal 80. Remember I said we were going to make them 80, hard-coded to be 80 tall. That way it all kind of looks nice and spacious. And then the last thing we need to do is register our cell. And that is table view.register. As you can see here, we want to register cell class, any class. So that is going to be favorite cell.self. And for reuse ID, again, is favorite cell.reuse ID. So that is what we have to configure for the table view. Again, just to kind of run down it real quick, adding the sub view. We're setting the frame to say, hey, fill up the whole view. We're hard coding our row height to let our row know, hey, we're going to be this tall. Setting our delegate and data source. Registering for the cell. Let's make sure we call the function, right? Something I forget to do a lot. Configure table view and get rid of that. And then remember we were using our data source right here, where the number of rows is going to be however many favorites we have. And then here's where we're configuring our cell in self row and index path every time a cell shows up on screen. So now we need to go into our get favorites here and do a bit of work. Remember, this was just our real quick down and dirty, let's just test this. Well, let's actually flesh out this function and make it legit. So let's get rid of some of the spacing here. I think I just added that, but since we are going to use self, we're going to need our good old weak self here, capture list. And because we have that, we got to do the guard let self equals self, else return. So let's give our switch statement some breathing room here. So in our success case, there's one thing before we just set favorites equal to favorites is we want to make sure we have favorites, right? Because if we don't have any favorites set, we want to show an empty state. So what we can do here, give it some space, is if favorites.isEmpty, then we will do show empty state. Remember, we have this, the reason I can just type show empty state, if you remember, we did on our extensions in our UI view controller extension back when we created our empty state. We have this show empty state function that will add this view for the empty state. So back to favorites list VC, and I have to give it a string because remember the empty state has a message. So for that string, we want to do no favorites question mark. And you can do /n to hard code the next line in your string. And then we can do add one on the follower screen. So you can tell the user like what to do in the empty state. And then we want this to be in self.view. And then I did forget to do self.here as well. Let's make this smaller. Command minus. I don't like the 2-line thing. So if favorites is empty, get rid of this here too. We're going to show the empty state. If the favorites is not empty, now we're going to basically set our favorites like we did before up here. And now we need to reload data on our table view. And if you're familiar with reloading table on a table view, you have to do that on the main thread. So let's dispatch queue.main.async to get to the main thread. And we can do tableview.reload data. And that will reload the data. It'll pull our newly populated favorites and populate the table view. Oops, forgot to do self. Now, what happens is though, we have to do this just in case there was, we pulled up the empty state first and then we added a favorite and came back. Our empty state's going to be on top. So we want to do view.bring subview to front. And we want to bring the table view to the front just in case the empty state gets populated on top of it. This is kind of an edge case, but this way we can always self.tableview, make sure our table view is going to be up front and showing. So that is our success case. Let's get rid of this unnecessary space and do our failure case, which as you may remember, our failure case is usually pretty straightforward. We just want to show an error. So self.present GF alert on main thread. Title, something went wrong. The message is going to be error.raw value. And the button title is going to just be OK. So now we have our get favorites function. We can clean this up a little bit, but for now we want to make sure it's working. But yeah, just to run through this again real quick, we are retrieving our favorites from persistence upon success. If the favorites is empty, we're going to show the empty state with the message of no favorites, add one on the follower screen. And we're going to fill up that view over the table view. If favorites is not empty, like there's actually favorites in there, then we're going to set the favorites to that favorites that we got passed through on the success case. And then we're going to reload our table view on the main thread. And then just to, again, handle the edge case where the empty state may be showing on top of it, we're going to make sure we bring the sub view to the front. This is kind of like z-index, like the vertical view hierarchy. We always want to make sure the table view is going to be on top when we actually want to show stuff. And then in the failure case, we're showing our custom alert. Now we need to call get favorites before we run this and test it. And instead of doing it in view did load, remember before, we want to do it in view will appear. View will appear, super.view will appear animated. And reason being, remember, like I said, view to load could only get called once. Well, if they pull up their favorites, they see they have no favorites, then they tab over to the follower list screen, add a favorite, and then tab back, view to load's not going to get called again. So view will appear will get called. So we want to make sure we call get favorites in view will appear to ensure that even if they're mid-session and they add new favorites, we're constantly refreshing those favorites. So now we can test this and see how our favorites look. And if you remember, we should have Sean Allen, we should have me, and we should have Caleb in our array. That's all I've added. So let's tap on our favorites tab. There it is, Sean Allen, Caleb Wells. So let's go add something back into the search. Now, this is where view will appear will come in, right? Because I already have the favorites tab up. View to load's already been called. Let's go to 0400. Whoops, no. I've been using DHH as he's a pretty famous developer only because it's an easy name and one of the few that I can remember. So we can hit the plus button there. Success. You've successfully added this user. Hooray. Now if we tap favorites, there he is right there. And now if we tap this, we want to show that user's list of favorites, but we haven't implemented our did select cell yet. So let's go on ahead and do that. And we also don't have swipe to delete. Like I'm swiping, nothing's happening. So those are the two delegate methods we're going to implement now, and that'll pretty much wrap up the table view and the project. Of course, we got to do some optimizations in future videos, but it'll initially be built. So let's go ahead and start doing that. So if we stop this, again, we're going back to the delegate methods here, down here. So like I mentioned, we want to do did select. So if you go here and start typing did select, you're going to get table view, as you see, did select. We need to get our favorite because we have to pass that favorite to the next screen. So let favorite equal, and it's basically the same exact line here on line 82. So I'm actually just going to copy and paste that because we're going to use the same favorites.indexPath.row. We're basically going to grab whatever favorite is at the index that we tapped. So now I need a destination VC for where we're going. So let dest VC, it's going to equal, we'll tab over to line these up. It's going to equal a follower list VC. We're going to initialize a new one. And then I can do dest VC dot username equals favorite dot login, and dest VC dot title, same thing, equals favorite.login. And then now we need to just push this new view controller onto the stack. So navigation controller.push view controller. Remember, push is when you're using navigation controller and presenting is when you're doing modally. And we want to push the dest VC onto the stack. Animated is true. And that will handle that one, but let's test it real quick. So again, just real quick, we're grabbing the favorite from whatever row we tapped. We're creating a follower list VC. We're setting the username on that follower list VC to whatever we tapp's login. We're also setting the title, and then we're going to push that onto the stack. So let's test this out real quick. Say, we're in our favorites array. So favorites, let's tap on Caleb. So cool. So there's Caleb name in the title. These are Caleb's followers. Caleb's got a nice amount of followers. And yeah, so that seems to be working. We can go back and we're at our favorites. We type DHH. There we go. He's got his list of followers. We go back, tap Sean, and you see my list of followers. So cool. So getting to the follower list VC from the favorites is working. So now we need to implement some swipe to delete action. So let's work on that. So let's stop this. And there's another table view delegate method called commit editing style. So if you start typing commit editing style, it'll probably be the first autocomplete. So table view .commit editing style. And there's a couple different editing styles that we can do, but we want to make sure we're doing delete. So guard let editing style, or I'm sorry, not guard let, guard editing style equals dot, and you can see you can do dot delete, insert dot none, dot delete, else return. So basically, if we're not doing a dot delete, just get out of here. We don't want to do anything else. And just like before, the first thing we need to do is we need to grab our favorite. So again, I'm just going to copy and paste again. Grab our favorite from the index path. Again, this is based on whatever row we're swiping to delete. And then now we need to remove that favorite. And the reason we're grabbing the favorite is because we need to let our array of favorites in the user defaults from persistence. We need to know what favorite to get rid of. But that's for the one that we're saving in persistence. We also have this array of favorites here on this screen up here that we're using to populate our table view. So we need to remove it from there as well. So we can do favorites dot remove at int. So we already know what index we're at, right? Because we have the index path.row. So at index path.row. Again, this is whatever row we're swiping on. So we know we can remove from that favorites array. And then now we need to delete those rows from the table view. So you can do table view dot delete rows, and you can see it's at, you pass an array of index paths, so you can delete multiple rows. We're only deleting one, so we can do at index path, just one array, just one, and that's whatever index path we're swiping. And then you can pick the animation. So if I do dot, you can do automatic, bottom, fade, left, middle, none. We're going to do left. You can play around with this to see if you like an animation better. So delete it with the left. So this is what's going to give us, I'll pull it up here. When you swipe to delete and you actually delete a row, it's going to give us this nice animation here by choosing left. So now we've handled the local array, right? Our favorites run that we're using on this screen. Now let's handle the one in persistence. Actually, I guess I didn't have to tab those over. So persistence manager dot update, right? Same thing we did. We're going to update it with the favorite, right? We grabbed this favorite here on line 101, and the action type is remove this time, dot remove. And completed here, yes, we are going to get an error, or potentially, right? If the removal is not successful, we're going to get an error. If the removal is successful, we're going to get nil and nothing happens. And because we're going to present an alert from here, we need our capture list, weak self. And again, because we did weak self, we got to do the old guard let self equal self, else return. And here we need to see if we have an error. Because again, like I just said, if we have an error, things went wrong, let's show a message. If we don't have an error, nothing happened. We're good. We don't have to say anything. So guard let error equal error, else. So this is what happens if we don't have an error. We actually don't want to do anything. We're just going to return here, one line, return. We're not going to pop up an error or an alert if something went smooth, because we're animating the deletion of the row. That is enough to signal to the user like, hey, this was deleted, it's successful, right? Because our table view is going to update. They don't need to know that like the behind the scenes user default update went successful. So we're just going to return there. And then if we do have an error, let's go ahead and just delete that here. If we do have an error, we want to actually show that we were unable to remove them. So self dot present alert on main thread, unable to remove, and then we pass in error dot raw value for our message, and then the button title is OK. And that is it for the deleting the swipe to delete. So all we have to do now is test it. Do a Command B, make sure we're not missing anything here. Cool. Let's do our swipe to delete test. Okay, so remember the persistence lasts in between. Last session we added DHH. There he is. So let's delete somebody. Sorry, Sean, you got to go. So I'm swiping. So I get that swipe to delete. If I tap delete, I get that animation that we set up. Now it's gone. So now let's test it. Let's stop this, run it again. And because we updated persistence, now when I type favorites, there should be no Sean, and there is no Sean, just Caleb and DHH. So let's delete DHH, gone, just Caleb. Now I can search for somebody, 0400, cool, we're around here. Let's add somebody else here. Let's add Paul, let's get his followers. Here we go. Let's add Paul Hendricks to our favorites. Hooray, added. Now let's tap on favorites. There's Paul Hendricks. Cool. So our persistence is working. Swipe to delete is working. We won't delete Caleb. We'll keep him. So yeah, we're up and running here with our table view. That kind of wraps up the project. Again, the first pass. This is a simulated take-home project. So once you get everything working on your take-home project, like you're not done. Like cool, like the heavy lifting is done. Like we're home free, but we're gonna spend the next couple of videos going through and optimizing our code. There's a little bit of jank in in some of the animations. Like again, the first draft is done, first pass, right? You never want to turn in your first pass. So again, we're gonna spend the next couple of videos optimizing, cleaning things up, basically like proofreading and making this very, very good. So when we turn in our project, it's gonna be a damn good project. At least that's the goal anyway. So we'll see you in those optimization videos.